My name is Sheridan Harris. I am a major in liberal arts with a concentration in philosophy. I do plan to further my education in philosophy and am interested in ethics. Specifically, I think bioethics is going to play a pivotal role in the future of our species. So today I'm going to be discussing the genetic modification of humans. So as life science and technological revolutions progress, I think biotechnology and genetic engineering are really unquestionably making miraculous advancements for humanity. However, as we continue to alter our evolutionary framework, I really think that it's crucial that we approach this technology pragmatically and with great scrutiny to ensure equality and happiness for all, especially in relation to reproductive destinies. Before examining the historical significance of controlling reproductive rights, I think it is worth mentioning that the genetic modification of human beings undeniably can have a beneficial role in the future of our society, curing cancer, preventing aging, eradicating terminal illnesses. However, debate surrounding the control of reproductive destiny in some fashion has been a central recurring theme throughout history. And with genetic engineering just becoming increasingly more practical, I really see this issue only becoming progressively prominent in society. So as we continue to alter humanity's evolutionary framework, setting regulations and ethical limitations is really paramount to ensure the protection of human rights. However, as I mentioned previously, while there are definitely ethical dilemmas surrounding genetic engineering, I really don't necessarily find this research and its consequent advancements in the medical field really inherently problematic. Biotechnological discoveries such as the creation of artificial organs and limbs are undeniably miraculous achievements for humanity. I really think the discussion should shift to whom we are entrusting this power and how to set ethical limitations and governance regulations to ensure the proper implementation of genetic modification within our society. So in order to effectively address a genetically modified future, we must examine historical attempts to manage reproductive destinies, as they indicate patterns of human behavior with such control. And unfortunately, if history is any indication of how people will utilize biotechnology in relation to reproductive rights, the future is pretty bleak. Historically, when genes were manipulated in attempts to improve an organism, it resulted in an extreme violation of human rights. And while this may seem like a pretty drastic statement, lest we forget the majority of people embraced and promoted the study and practice of eugenics, as Jeremy Rifkin notes in his biotech lecture. 2 out of 3 colleges taught eugenics, and 70,000 Americans were sterilized by state law because they were considered inferior biologically. We even passed immigration policy in the 1920s against those considered of poor genetic stock. Wow. I think it's worth mentioning that our government has a pattern of not making sound judgments concerning upholding human rights, even when faced with seemingly obvious moral choices. Throughout the history of this country, our government has consistently promoted the violation of human rights in some fashion. And unfortunately, many violations, specifically concerning women and their reproductive destinies, are still being practiced today, whether that be in forced sterilizations or denying women access to proper health care. For instance, there is a current investigation going on in Georgia concerning the forced sterilization of immigrant women. In September of 2020, NPR released a statement about a nurse's whistleblower complaint alleging the repeated forced sterilization of copious women currently detained in immigration camps after seemingly routine doctor visits and checkups. Don Wooten makes accusations against Dr. Mahindra Amin, stating, "I've had several detained women on numerous occasions ask why they had hysterectomies. These women claim that they were taken to an uncertified doctor, Dr. Mahindra, for minor issues and routine visits and had more drastic invasive procedures performed without their knowledge or consent." The reason I'm talking about this is this instance underscores the lack of ethical limitations when accountability, governance regulation, and transparency are absent. When debating the potential ethical limitations of genetic modification, I think the conversation that requires a more complicated human rights discussion is the creation of designer children. Mainly, I think it's pretty impossible to necessarily understand the consequences of neoevolution. Can we know what genes would make us most adaptable for our future environment? Do we have the ability to distinguish between undesirable traits from life-threatening traits? It is pretty self-evident to me that most people would modify genes in their children to ensure the eradication of a terminal disease. This is clear in the unanimous support and acceptance of CRISPR's capability to eliminate cancer through genetic editing. However, do we as a society address the eradication of non-deadly but somewhat negative traits, or redress the children who did not have the luxury to receive such treatment? It is also difficult to navigate discussions concerning the lack of quality in certain individuals. Many people who are disabled do not necessarily consider themselves to be impaired and find that term pretty derogatory and prefer to classify themselves as simply less able than other people. Genetic editing can easily send a message to these people that they are really inferior when in actuality they live perfectly normal, successful, and happy lives. It also can create a new system of classism between wealthy, enhanced people and poor, non-enhanced children. However, this opposition to genetic modification is somewhat problematic from a pro-choice response, and I think that the term choice should come under scrutiny when discussing the future of reproductive rights. The belief that every woman has autonomy and the right to control her reproductive destiny is integral to the pro-choice movement, specifically regarding abortion. A woman has the right to decide what she does with her fetus, as it is an extension of her body. However, following this logic, any pro-choice argument can quickly appropriate the advancement of genetic editing in the fetus. Thus, it is extremely contradictory to claim that a woman ought to deprive a fetus of the right to life while also arguing that she has no actual authority to alter her fetus. The pro-choice movement heavily centers around the notion that a woman has the right to control her reproductive choices, so defenders of genetic engineering could easily exploit this rhetoric to push their own agenda and the evolution of a new species. I think the most effective solution to rectify this dilemma from a pro-choice response would be to allow genetic modification if and only if it is accessible universally. Because genetic modification can easily be weaponized as an extension of eugenics and used as a means to control and eliminate groups of people in the future who are viewed as inferior, we really must discuss the most efficient governance regulations to ensure the protection of human rights. We need to redefine the landscape to approach the future of biotech concerning genetic modifications in a beneficial and equal manner. Even if we take the more far-fetched aspects, such as designer babies, out of the discussion of bioethics and strictly consider the implementation of genetic editing only to eradicate terminal conditions, it still has a high probability of resulting in inequality and classism if it's not included as a tenet of universal health care. When considering the future of genetic modification, it is essential to address the current judicial threats to healthcare, as it will play the most significant role in the future of biotechnology. If our society can't even agree that everyone deserves access to basic healthcare regardless of their class, how will they justly tackle access to genetic modification? Currently, poor and minority women are denied access to proper healthcare, and the previous administration worked pretty tirelessly to actively fight against providing low-income women with fertility management and reproductive rights. This is specifically concerning because if the courts are promoting the discrimination of women based on religious or social beliefs, I can only imagine how they will respond to, or mostly not respond to, giving women the right to modify their children's genes. If our government does not even believe that low-income women should have the right to control their reproductive destinies or access to proper fertility management, I really highly doubt that they would grant access to genetically editing out terminal diseases. Considering the Trump administration has tried over 67 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, it is clear that they do not think that poor people have the right to health care. Luckily, these attempts have continuously failed, but it really underscores how our government views women and low-income individuals. And I find the current debates concerning the Affordable Care Act and universal health care integral to the future of biotechnology. because concerns about equal access and fair distribution are already so controversial and problematic for ordinary healthcare. Thus, if this is any suggestion of how the government will regulate genetic editing, access for the poor and disadvantaged is highly unlikely. So the only way that we can responsibly handle biotechnology is if we can solve our current healthcare debates and stop treating it as some luxury. If we do not adopt universal healthcare, I imagine a future where only the affluent will have access to genetic modification and the opportunity to utilize this technology, and the wealth gap between classes will progressively increase. Thus, if this technology persists and the discussion is rooted in pro-choice rhetoric, the only viable solution to reconcile this complicated decision is to make genetic modification ubiquitously available for everyone. Providing universal healthcare that includes genetic modification would be the only way to really grapple with genetic modification, because it ensures equality and discourages any violation of human rights. For the short term, we must at a minimum defend healthcare and make it accessible to all people, irrespective of their income, and by protecting the Affordable Care Act. For instance, maybe Congress can find a middle ground by comparing the effects and healthcare outcomes in varying states. Simply, though, being a woman should not be a pre-existing condition, and people should not have the ability to deny healthcare to low-income individuals. For the long term, however, the United States must eventually adopt a universal healthcare plan so that the discussion regarding access to genetic modification is easily approachable and realistic. Unfortunately, if we as a society cannot agree that all women have the right to control their reproductive destiny or have access to healthcare, it's nearly impossible to tackle whether women have the right to genetically modify their fetuses. Nevertheless, genetic modification is a miraculous advancement for humanity, and it should not be dismissed. However, it is crucial that we approach this technology pragmatically and ethically by addressing the problematic history of reproductive destinies and current debates concerning reproductive rights and access to proper health care. It is my hope that it is evident that we must implement governance regulations, set ethical limitations for this biotechnology, and provide universal health care to ensure that genetic modification does not result in a violation of human rights.